His heart shattered when he saw his wife cheating with two rich men. At first, he kept silent, plotting a revenge that would leave a lasting mark. He hired a professional to set their yacht ablaze, exposing their darkest secrets. Now, amidst the wreckage, she wants him back. This is no ordinary story. It's a tale of betrayal and retribution. Watch the drama unfold. Enjoy watching it. Jake Martin, a lawyer in Boston, felt lucky to finish his case in time to join his wife, Jill, at the law school's annual reunion near Miami. He arrived just in time to see Jill behaving flirtatiously with Juan Mendoza, one of the wealthy twin brothers Jake disliked. Instead of confronting her, he decided to watch and take photos of what was happening. Jake saw Jill spend the day with Juan, his brother Hector, Sally, and her friend Bill Allen. Later, around the barbecue and the fire, Jill, Juan, Hector, and his wife Maria engaged in a provocative dance. Jill took off her blue sarong and danced suggestively with Juan. The sarong landed near Jake, who picked it up and hid it under his shirt. That evening, Jill, Juan, Maria, Hector, Sally, and Tom were in the jacuzzi on the resort's beach terrace. The women were topless, and the men were kissing and touching them. Near midnight, Jill allowed Juan to accompany her to her bungalow. Watching from a hiding place, Jake saw Jill invite Juan into her room. Heartbroken, Jake decided to return to Boston early in the morning. When Jill came home on Sunday evening, Jake could barely hold back his anger. He asked her probing questions about her activities, but Jill didn't admit anything. She didn't connect her actions in Miami to Jake's hostility, even after he said he was moving into the guest room. Jake asked Jill where her wedding rings were. She said she left them with Sally for safekeeping, but Jake found them on Juan and Hector's luxury yacht, Temptress. Jake took off his wedding ring and hung it on a leather cord around his neck. He told Jill he would put his ring back on when she did the same. That evening, Jake overheard Jill talking on the phone to her best friend, Sally. He heard Jill say, "Yes, that was amazing," which he interpreted as her enjoying the affair. This hurt Jake even more. Jake, still reeling from the betrayal, moved into a studio apartment near his office. He missed his son, little Jake, and his wife, Jill, but he couldn't reconcile his feelings of betrayal with his love for Jill. He threw himself into his work, avoiding Jill and even his son. He stayed at the Marriott Suites and spent most of his time in his office. One Sunday evening, while sorting through old matters in his office, Jake's phone rang. Without thinking, he answered. It was Jill. She asked him to meet her in the lobby of his building in 20 minutes. Reluctantly, Jake agreed. He checked his appearance in the bathroom, noting he hadn't shaved or gotten a haircut in days. Jake sat in the courthouse lobby, waiting. The security guard, Joe, jumped when they heard the door open and Jill's heels clicking on the marble floor. Jake told Joe he would escort the visitor, and they rode the elevator to his office in silence. Jill looked tired and scared. She wore jeans and a heavy winter coat, her hands stuffed into the pockets. Once in his office, Jill finally unbuttoned her coat and sat down with a sigh. She told Jake she had found her engagement and wedding rings, showing them to him. Jake pretended to be happy and asked where she found them. Jill claimed Sally had them for safekeeping when she was on a boat tour. Jake knew she was lying because she had left the rings on Juan and Hector's yacht. Jill asked Jake to put his wedding ring back on and come home to her and little Jake. Jake nodded and pretended to agree, but then he stopped and asked, "Can I look at your rings, please?" Jill hesitated, then held out her hand so I could see the rings. "These are fake," I said. Jill quickly pulled her hand away. "What do you mean, Jake?" "They're not fakes, but duplicates," she protested. "Why did Sally give you duplicate rings? They must have cost a lot," I continued. "Is the wedding ring engraved with our initials and wedding date?" Jill tried to hide her guilt and quickly pulled her hand back. "Of course they're mine. Why wouldn't they be?" "I don't know, Jill, but these aren't your original rings. Why is Sally tricking you? Or are you trying to trick me? And why?" Jill held back tears and said, "How can you say that? I just want you back. I don't understand why you're so upset, just because I lost the rings." Jill didn't realize my anger was about her cheating with Juan. She thought I couldn't know about her actions from Friday to Sunday. I had time to think and calm down, but I was still deeply hurt. I felt a loss of self-esteem knowing my wife wanted someone else. I was ashamed that people knew I was betrayed. I lost trust in Jill. not only because of her night with Juan, but also because she kept lying to me. I missed my son. He and Jill were my world. Losing one didn't mean I had to lose the other. I didn't want to be a victim. I realized I couldn't live separately forever. I studied Jill for a few seconds and then said, "I'm going to go home. I miss my son." I didn't mention that I missed Jill, though I did. "I'll sleep in the guest room for now." This seemed to reassure Jill. She thought this meant we could start fixing things. "I'll be home Monday night," I said. "See you then." I told her I needed to get back to work. Jill understood and stood up to leave. "I'm glad you'll be home with us," she said. She thought we could hug and kiss, but when she came toward me, I stepped back. "You haven't touched me since I got back," she said with tears in her eyes, then left my office. Jill didn't connect my anger with her cheating. Maybe it was denial. I actually returned home on Monday evening. I moved my things into the guest room. Jill gave me space when I used the master bedroom. I spent most of my time with my son, little Jake. Jill and I were one for his sake. We were affectionate in front of him, even if we weren't touching. When Jake wasn't around, I was distant and silent with Jill. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't happy either. 3 weeks passed. I was home for my son, but that was all. With Jill, I was there in body, but not in spirit. I slept in the guest room and spent most of my time with my son. I've always known he was wonderful, but I appreciated him even more now. Jill and I reached a sort of peace. We worked together on household tasks. She stayed away when I went to the master bedroom for clothes or to shower. I cleaned and kept her office tidy so she could work part-time. We survived. Well, I survived. Jill looked thinner and her spirit seemed dimmed. One day, Jill said in a flat voice, "Sally called yesterday." "Good old Sally," I replied angrily. "Did you tell her to go to hell?" "No, Jake, why should I? She wants me to visit her in Atlanta." "That's better than her coming here. I don't want to see her." "She wants me to visit her, Jake, not us." I almost said something sarcastic about Sally causing trouble, but I stayed silent. "I want to see her," Jill said. This time I couldn't stay quiet. "Want to talk about Miami?" I said sarcastically. I pushed her away more, but I couldn't help it. The pain of her betrayal was fresh. "I'm sure homecoming will come up, but I want to talk about us. She's my best friend. But I won't say anything if you don't want me to." I was surprised she asked. "Of course. Speak if you think it will help." "I doubt it will," I continued. "I don't think you know Sally as well as you think." Over the next week, we worked together to keep Jake's life normal. I knew what I had to do to regain my self-respect. I loved Jill with all my heart, but I couldn't live with a woman who cheated on me. About a month after the reunion, I was in the kitchen washing dishes after dinner. It became our habit. Jill cooked dinner, and I cleaned up. I was wiping my wine glass when I heard a sad cry from the living room. I stopped and walked in to see Jill sitting on the couch with our wedding album in her lap. When she saw me, she held up the wedding rings and my boarding pass. "You knew?" she said, tears in her eyes. "You knew all along!" she cried, clearly upset. She covered her face with her hands. "I can't look at you," she said. "Don't look at me." I sat down across from her and said, "Yes, I know everything. I was there. I saw everything." "I pushed it out of my mind," she said, sobbing. "I pretended it didn't happen. I wanted it to go away." "Maybe it disappeared for you," I said, "but not for me. I see it over and over again. I even have photos." "Photos?" she exclaimed. "You have photos?" "Yes. I took photos of everything that happened on my phone." "No, no, no," Jill cried. "I have to see them," she said. "Are you sure?" I asked. "They're clear. You know what happened?" "I need to know what you know," Jill replied. I took my phone out of my pocket, opened the photo file, and went to the folder with the pictures from the reunion. "They start here," I said, handing her the phone. Jill took the phone and looked through the photos. They showed everything from the moment Mendoza's yacht docked until she invited Juan to her bungalow. Some were blurry, but they proved I was there and saw everything. Jill threw the phone on the couch and cried harder. "I'm so sorry, Jake. I would do anything to change what happened." "But you can't, right?" I said, almost indifferently. "You practically destroyed me. You had sex with the two men I hated most in the world." It took Jill a few seconds to understand. "What do you mean, 2 men?" she asked, still crying. "Did you know you had sex with both Juan and Hector that night?" I said, almost indifferently. "What are you talking about?" Jill asked, still crying. "Let me tell you what happened that night," I said, and began to recount the events. "I watched from afar when you returned from the cruise on Mendoza's yacht. I was surprised to see you topless and even more surprised when Juan hugged you and you didn't object. I decided to see how far you would go if you thought I wasn't around. I watched you at the luau as you danced with Juan. I saw you let Juan touch you in the jacuzzi, and I saw Juan walk you to your bungalow door late at night. What hurt me the most was when I saw you invite Juan into your bungalow. It killed me. I was furious. I went to your bungalow with hatred for both of you. I picked up a large stone. I wanted to break into your room and hurt Juan, and maybe you too. But then I thought about little Jake. I realized I had to leave and deal with the consequences later." Jill finally looked at me and said, "What are you going to do?" "I want a divorce," I said, tears in my eyes. Jill screamed, "No, no, no, I didn't want this to happen. You were never supposed to find out." "I have no choice," I replied. "You slept with my worst enemies and then lied about it repeatedly. You never thought to admit to cheating so we could work it out. You lied and lied. I can't stay with you anymore. You didn't respect me or our marriage." Jill sobbed. "You can't forgive me and let us continue like before? You can't give me a chance?" "I gave you a chance, and you continued to lie to me," I replied, holding back tears. "My sense of honor and self-respect won't let me move on as if nothing happened. You wouldn't respect me if I did. I would forever be a cuckold to you, to myself, and to our friends and colleagues. My pride won't allow this, even though I love you. And even though I love you, I don't want to touch you. I don't want to be with you, knowing the last person with you was Juan or Hector. I don't want to kiss you." Jill listened but seemed confused. "What do you mean about Juan and Hector?" she asked through tears. "You're even worse than you think," I replied. "Didn't you know you were with both Juan and Hector that night?" "I still don't get it," she said. "I was with Juan, only Juan all night." "How many times did you enjoy it?" I asked. "Please, Jake, I don't want to talk about it. I tried to forget that night." "How many times did Juan enjoy it?" I kept asking. "Please, Jake," she begged. "I didn't want you to know anything happened. I definitely don't want to talk about how many times or how long I was with Juan. I barely remember most of it. I drank too much and was too drunk." "Let me tell you what happened," I said. "Juan walked you to the bungalow a little after midnight. Judging by how eager you were, you and Juan probably started within minutes. After a while, Juan probably asked for more, and you did it again. Then, you likely had sex again. You probably did it at least 6 times. Jill was still crying as I recounted. "You're closer than you think," she said. "I couldn't believe how much Juan wanted me. I'm so sorry, Jake. Looking back, it all led up to what happened. I just went along with it. I never wanted you to know. I hurt so badly. I see you're hurt. You know I love you, and I know you love me and little Jake with all your heart. We have to get through this." "Let me tell you what really happened," I said, raising my hand to stop her. "After I decided not to break into your bungalow, I walked along the beach to calm down. I planned to return to Boston without anyone knowing I was there. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, I saw a man at your door. At first, I thought it was Juan taking a break. Then I saw the real Juan come out to greet his brother Hector. They exchanged shirts. Hector entered your bungalow dressed as Juan, and Juan went to his room. So, 2 men were with you, Juan and Hector." "No, no, no," Jill cried. "I didn't know. How could they?" "Technically, Hector was with you without your consent," I said, "but that doesn't change the bigger picture. You were unfaithful. You did it so easily." "Yes, you're right," Jill said. "It was too easy. I didn't think about the consequences. What was I thinking? Where was my respect for you and our marriage? If you want a divorce, I won't fight it. We'll still be a family for little Jake." "I've thought about this a lot. My main concern is little Jake. The house is too big for one of us. We should sell it and each get separate places near our work and each other. Little Jake can still go to the same school. We'll split our time with him. He'll live with me for a month, then with you, so he feels like he still has both parents. We'll spend holidays and birthdays together as a family. We'll be polite and courteous for Jake's sake. Other than that, we'll live separate lives." I've decided to leave the public defender's office and return to my old partner, Paul Evans, and his law firm. Paul has wanted me back since I left for city work. He needs someone with my court experience. But you loved being a public defender, Jill interrupted. Yes, I did, I replied. I felt like I was helping people who needed it most. I also gained a lot of court experience on many issues. I leave the office in the hands of young, energetic lawyers eager to learn. I want to focus on higher-level criminal justice. Paul promised me lots of work and good pay. Jill cried most of the night. I couldn't help her and didn't try. I cried too. The next morning, Jill said she couldn't face me for a few days and was going to Sally's. I thought it was for the best. Not that Sally would help much. I didn't like Sally because I thought she set Jill up. Jill still believed Sally was her friend. An hour after Jill's plane landed in Atlanta, I texted her. I assumed Sally had picked her up and they were at her house. I wrote that besides the photos I took at the resort, I had a video of her dancing around the fire with Juan and attached the file. I told her to pay attention to Sally's actions. The video showed Jill, Juan, Hector, and Maria dancing seductively by the fire. In the background, some classmates were watching, and some looked away because the moves were suggestive. As Jill and Juan danced, Sally walked up to Jill, gave her a drink, and whispered something. After Sally walked away, Jill drank it in one gulp and threw the glass into the fire. The video showed Jill dancing more wildly, then tearing off her light blue sarong and throwing it in the air. The sarong flew towards the videographer, and the video ended. Less than 2 hours later, Jill called me and said she was on the next flight home. I met Jill at the airport. She was silent for the first few minutes of the ride home. Then she said, "I feel like I was set up. I don't know why. It doesn't excuse my behavior. I made all the choices. I drank too much, smoked weed, and let myself be Juan's date for the weekend. I had sex with him. I thought they were my friends, but they weren't. I still don't understand why." "I don't know why either," I said. We were silent the rest of the way home. Divorce papers were filed quickly. Jill and I hired a lawyer to divide our property fairly. We separated our finances and managed our money separately. We found places to live near our jobs and each other. Our house had appreciated in value, and we sold it for a good profit, which we split. I used my share as a down payment on a 3-bedroom townhouse and invested the rest. My new income allowed me to save more money. Soon, I would need it. Jill bought a 3-bedroom apartment less than a mile from my townhouse. While discussing custody of little Jake, we decided to decorate his rooms in both homes the same way to make the transition easier. The first month was tough as we moved our belongings. I adjusted to my new job as a criminal defense lawyer in a private firm. Paul gave me lots of cases and responsibilities as an equal partner in our firm, Evans and Martin. I kept little Jake with me for the first month while Jill moved into her apartment. Jill took little Jake for the second month while I settled into my townhouse. I refused to hear details about the night Jill cheated. I couldn't imagine any explanation that would justify her actions. I was still hurting, but she insisted I listen to her side. On the day we signed the divorce papers, she insisted on explaining what happened. I didn't want to hear it, but I agreed. After signing the documents, we dismissed the lawyers and were left alone in the conference room. She started with an apology, saying she knew she hurt me badly and was sorry for causing the end of our marriage. She understood that my pride was too wounded to get over it, and that I had lost self-respect due to something that wasn't my fault. She almost cried, but I reminded her that I wanted to hear her version of events, not more apologies. She gathered her strength and began. "Reunion weekend was so nice. Did you know it was the first time in 6 months that I was alone for longer than a trip to the store? I was on my own, without work, my husband, or little Jake. Just me, on the way to Miami. I wanted to join my single friends and have fun like we did in law school." The resort was so beautiful, with warm tropical breezes, rum cocktails, hot salsa, and beautiful people. "Jake, it was just so sexy there," Jill said. "Jill," cried Jake. "Everyone was there and we were having such a good time. It felt like college again before we got married and had little Jake. I felt free, not responsible for anything or anyone." "I've always given you space when you needed it," I replied, my voice flat. "I know, Jake. It's not your fault. It's just life. I couldn't help myself." "You wanted to get married, Jill. I thought you wanted a child, too." Yes, I did. I wanted both. I love you, Jake. Oh, it's so hard, she continued. I hoped to join my single friends from school, but most were married, and the single ones didn't come. But Sally was there. She promised to make sure I had a great time. She told Juan I was alone, and he said he'd take care of us. She always got along well with the Mendozas. On Friday afternoon, we all gathered on the patio for cocktails. We met Juan, Hector, and Hector's wife, Maria, and planned the next day. They suggested using their yacht instead of the resort's boat for a barbecue on a small island. I was suspicious of Juan's intentions and wanted to stay with other friends, but Sally convinced me to go. I asked Steve and Meredith to join us, and they agreed. The yacht was nicer and less crowded than a tour boat. Though I missed my classmates, I enjoyed the freedom of the yacht. The dinner was great, and there was plenty of booze. I shouldn't have started drinking so early. Then Juan brought out some weed and we all smoked. I felt so relaxed and free. I went with the flow, not realizing I was being led by people pretending to be my friends. I drank more and smoked more, which lowered my resistance. I let Juan touch me in the jacuzzi. It was all very seductive and exciting. By the time Juan walked me to my room, I dragged him inside. I wasn't thinking about you. I'm so sorry. I woke up the next morning alone with a terrible headache. The room smelled of sex. I was in pain. It began to dawn on me what I had done to you. To us. I cried and vomited until I was dry heaving. I called room service for clean sheets, took a long shower, and tried to wash away the guilt. When the sheets arrived, I made the bed and curled up with a pillow, unable to sleep. I felt so ashamed. At about 1 p.m., Meredith came looking for me. She realized something was wrong, and I finally let her in. She hugged me, and I cried in her arms. I told her everything and asked, "How will I ever face Jake? It will kill him." Meredith took charge. "This never happened, Jill," she told me. "Forget it happened. You don't have to feel guilty. Jake will never know." She ordered coffee and food. I started to feel better physically. Meredith insisted I go to the banquet and dance that evening to act normal. I didn't want to see my classmates or Juan. Meredith reminded me, "Last night didn't happen. Act normal. No one but you and Juan knows what happened, and he won't want Jake to know either." We went to the alumni lounge to hang out. Several people asked where we'd been that morning. Meredith said we'd been shopping. We returned to our rooms to change for the banquet. I followed Meredith's plan, pushing the incident to the back of my mind and focusing on my friends. A few mentioned my dance with Juan, but didn't suspect anything. Meredith and Steve took me to the cocktail hour before the banquet. Meredith stayed close, like a protective angel. I started to enjoy the evening. I saw Juan and Hector at another table with Maria, Bill, and Sally. Juan kept looking at me, but I avoided eye contact. I was afraid he'd approach me or ask me to dance. Meredith told me not to worry. She had personally told Juan to stay away from me. Otherwise, there will be problems. I spent the rest of the evening trying to enjoy being with my classmates. I only had one glass of wine and danced once with Steve. Meredith and Steve made sure I got to my room that night. The next morning, I rode with them on the hotel bus to the airport and flew home. I pushed the incident out of my mind enough to rid myself of any guilt. I wanted everything to seem normal, even to the point of not making you suspicious by acting guilty. "I didn't feel guilty," Jill finished abruptly. "This is what happened. I will never forgive myself for what I did. I don't think you can forgive me. I don't expect that. Just know that I will always be sorry for hurting you so badly, and know that I will always love you." Jill stood up and left the room. I waited for the divorce to become final. It was an uneventful day when I received notification that I was single again. I continued to work hard. Paul was right about the benefit of my experience as a public defender. It was an advantage for our law firm. I knew the court system well and understood the inner workings of the prosecutor's office. We moved from making deals to taking cases to jury trials, and we started winning. Our law firm's reputation grew as we took on more important cases and clients. My usual after-work spot was the local lounge bar, where Paul and I would go to relax or meet clients in a more casual setting than our office. On this particular day, it was only 2 p.m., and the lounge was almost empty. I sat down in a secluded booth and ordered a double shot of spiced rum. I probably wouldn't have thought about anything extreme if it weren't for the email I received from Sally last night. "Dear Jake, I understand you are now divorced. I'm very sorry to hear this. On the other hand, it frees you up to meet other people. I am one of these other people. We dated for a short time before you met my roommate, Jill. I was more beautiful then. In fact, I was very beautiful. I can't tell you how fascinated I was by you at that time. You were all I could think about. It hurt me more than you could imagine, watching you date and fall in love with my roommate. I never thought she was worthy of you. You didn't see her flaws. She was cunning. I knew you were wrong when you married her, and I always wanted to prove it to you. I did this at the reunion. I showed you that she is just an easily accessible woman. Even though she hadn't had much contact with Juan since they broke up in law school, I knew she didn't dislike him as much as you did. It was easy to get Juan, Hector, Jill, and me together for the weekend. I knew that with a little help, she would trap herself. Juan was at the height of his charm. He always wanted her, and he always hated you because he thought you stole Jill from him. Anyway, I'm sorry it turned out this way, but I wanted you to know that I'm here for you. Please come see me sometime. I will do anything to help you forget her. I know I'm not as beautiful as Jill, but I could love you a lot more than she ever did. Sally. I assume she was drunk when she wrote this letter. She wouldn't have admitted to setting Jill up if she was sober. I forwarded the email to Jill without comment. The letter confirmed that Jill had been set up by her good friend Sally. It was also obvious that I had been set up too. It didn't justify what Jill did. Marriages must withstand temptation, and spouses must avoid situations where they are vulnerable. Ever since the incident between my wife and the Mendoza brothers, I have felt humiliated and furious. Initially, I took out all my anger on Jill, whom I blamed for everything. The intensity of these feelings subsided somewhat after I initiated the divorce, but they did not go away. The pressures of my job as a trial lawyer distracted me from these feelings, but they still remained inside me. Since our separation and the start of our divorce, the anger and resentment have not diminished. I wanted revenge. No, I didn't just want revenge, I craved it. Among our clients was Gerard Giardino, a wealthy real estate entrepreneur focused on commercial real estate. He was arrested and charged with arson. He was accused of setting fire to several warehouses on the pier to prepare the land for the construction of a high-rise condominium. The buildings were insured, though not for much. There was little evidence. No incendiary devices, no traces of accelerants, no timers, nothing. Most of the evidence was circumstantial. It was well known that Giardino wanted to clear the land. Mr. DeLuca Dino was out of town the night of the fire, at a meeting with respected businessmen in Baltimore. My gut feeling was that he was guilty. However, I was confident that with so little concrete evidence, I could secure his acquittal. I might even get the charges dropped. I wanted to know more. I called my contact at the private detective agency our firm used, Drake Detective Agency. The lead detective was a friend, and we used his services when we needed to get the facts. I explained what I knew and suspected. Giardino had hired an arsonist, a good one, to start the fire in the warehouse. Giardino had several businesses to support his real estate activities, real estate offices, a construction company, and several small office buildings. The Drake Detective Agency checked all of them. The assigned detective checked the backgrounds of all employees working for Giardino. There were about 70 employees, all of them clean and above suspicion. However, the reason Paul and I used this particular detective service was their thoroughness. They even checked applications from people Giardino didn't hire and found one interesting person, Henry Williams. He applied for a job as a night watchman. What stood out was that he was a retired firefighter. The detective asked if I needed more information about Williams. I said yes. Within a few days, I had a current picture of Henry Williams's life. Chief Williams had been retired for over 7 years. 5 years ago, his wife became very ill with a strange illness that kept her housebound. Her condition worsened, so her sister moved in to help care for her. Although Williams had a good pension, his wife's medical costs were very high. That's when he applied for the job at the Giardino warehouse. He wasn't hired. The detectives also found out he paid most of his bills with money orders, using cash that didn't go through his bank account. Holding Williams's job application made me uneasy, and I didn't know why. His service record was long and distinguished, full of honors and awards. He went from a simple firefighter to the chief of a large city fire station. He also served as a fire inspector and investigated arson cases. I felt like I was holding the file of the man who started the fire in the warehouse for Giardino. Instead of adding this information to our case files, I hid it. I folded Williams's job application and put it in my coat pocket. When I left the office, I told my secretary I would be gone for the rest of the day. I drove to Williams's house. It was a one-story middle-class home in a good neighborhood. The Williams family had lived there for over 25 years. I took off my coat, loosened my tie, and left my briefcase in the car. A minute after I rang the bell, a woman came to the door. I explained that I wanted to speak with Chief Williams about a personal matter. I assumed it was the sister of Williams's wife. She didn't invite me in, but told me to wait and close the door. A few minutes later, Chief Williams appeared. He was tall and thin, with deep wrinkles and thinning gray hair. He looked very respectable despite wearing dark trousers and a pullover. I introduced myself and gave him my business card. He looked at it and asked what I needed. I told him I was Gerard Giardino's lawyer and was defending him in the arson case. "What does this have to do with me?" he asked. I felt uncomfortable standing on his porch, so I asked him to take a walk with me. He pointed to a park he often visited for exercise. "You know Mr. Giardino, don't you, Chief Williams?" I asked. He didn't answer directly. I realized I had to be blunt with him. When we reached the edge of the park, I untucked my shirt. "Chief, I want you to see that I'm not wearing any recording devices. Whatever we say will stay between us." He kept walking and asked again what I needed from him. "Chief Williams, I have good reason to believe you were the arsonist who started the fire that destroyed Giardino's warehouses. I can't prove it now, but if I give the police the evidence I have, I'm sure they can find out the truth." He remained calm and said, "I'll ask you one last time, Mr. Martin. What do you need from me? Blackmail? Good luck with that." I got to the point. "I want you to burn and sink a boat for me." Chief Williams was surprised. "Why should I do this for you, Mr. Martin? Do you think you can blackmail me?" "No," I replied. "I want to hire you. I will pay you $50,000 to burn and sink a boat for me. It's a big boat in a small marina outside Miami." "And why do you need me to sink this boat, Mr. Martin?" "I'll tell you everything, Chief. After I do this, you can either reject my offer and go to the police, forget I made the offer, or accept it. I still have to go to Miami to check on my sister's house. Give me the details of the boat and I'll take a look. I'll be back in a week. Meet me here in the park. I walk here every day around 2 p.m. Do not call, write, or contact me in any electronic form. Never write anything down. I'll be back in the park next Wednesday." I gave him information about the Temptress, owned by Juan and Hector and their family, and told him where to find it. He didn't write anything down. After receiving the information, he turned and walked back the way he came. I followed him 5 minutes later, got into my car, and drove home. I had a hard time focusing on work the next week. It was difficult to concentrate, although I think my partner and I did a good job developing the defense for our client, Mr. Giardino. The police had no evidence to suggest the warehouse fire was anything but an accident. Even though Mr. Giardino benefited from the incident, on Wednesday I was sitting at a table in the park near Chief Williams's house at 2 p.m. He came to the park and sat on a bench close enough to talk but far enough away that no one would think we were together. "I can do what you ask," Chief Williams said calmly. "Give me more details. I want the boat set on fire and sunk on the 17th of June at the mouth opposite the resort, about a quarter of a mile downstream from the marina." "You realize I'll have to do this in the middle of the night, don't you?" he said. "Yes, that's exactly what I want. You also understand that this will look intentional, not like an accident." "That's exactly what I want it to look like," I replied. "Insurance is less likely to pay if it's clearly deliberate. I want 50% of the $50,000 in advance, plus $10,000 for expenses. I want cash. Use 20s and 50s. See you in a week, same time," the chief added. As he started to leave, he said, "Meet me next time on the other side of the park, near the picnic area." Without further ado, he walked towards his house. I worked for months to gather the cash. I couldn't just withdraw $35,000 from my savings without raising suspicion if I was ever investigated. Instead, I took a little at a time and gambled with it or pretended to gamble. I went to the racetrack and made dozens of bets, $100 to $200 at a time. Sometimes I won, but most of the time I lost. I kept my tickets, even the losing ones, and picked up discarded ones from other players. Within a few months, I had accumulated enough tickets to total over $50,000. Documented losses would support the story that I lost a lot of money gambling. The following Wednesday, I was in the park again. Chief Williams and I said very little to each other. I handed him the grocery bag I had brought and left. We agreed to meet one last time in the park after the boat was sunk, so I could give him the rest of the payment. As the time for the next class reunion approached, I received an invitation. I had always enjoyed these reunions in the past, but this time I didn't want to go. Too many people knew what Jill did, and everyone knew we divorced because of it. At a school event for Jake that both Jill and I attended, I told her I wasn't going. No surprise, she said she wasn't going either. When we responded that neither of us planned to attend, Steve called me personally to convince us to change our minds. I told him that neither of us wanted to go. Both he and Meredith were very disappointed. On the night of the reunion, I had a date. I needed an alibi for my whereabouts that evening. I've had dates before, but usually when it was Jill's turn to take care of little Jake. That evening, I asked her to look after little Jake. I took him to Jill's apartment after getting dressed for the date. Jill noticed I was dressed up and asked if I was seeing someone. I told her that I go on dates sometimes, but I don't have anyone exclusive. She clearly didn't like knowing I was seeing another woman and would probably have sex that night, but she did fix my tie and said I looked very attractive. I asked her if she was seeing anyone. She said she wasn't interested in socializing yet. This made me feel both good and guilty. Good that she wasn't seeing anyone, and guilty that I was. I tried to act normal and was glad I had a date to take my mind off what might be happening at the reunion. We had a really good time. Drinks, dinner, dancing, and then heading back to her house for the night. After we had sex, we were both tired and fell asleep. At 2 o'clock in the morning, my phone rang. It probably rang 10 times before I woke up and answered. "Who's calling me at this hour?" I said, picking up the phone to the insistent call. "Jake, you'll never guess what's going on," said an overly excited Steve. I suddenly remembered my plans and instantly woke up, but I tried to sound sleepy and uninterested. "Couldn't it wait until morning? I was fast asleep." No, you have to see this, Jake," Steve shouted excitedly. "The Mendoza yacht is on fire at the mouth of the river. It's lighting up the whole sky. I'll send you some photos and videos. You can't miss this even if you're in Boston." Steve hung up, and a few minutes later I got the video on my phone. It was spectacular. In the middle of the mouth, the boat was completely engulfed in flames. The entire deck from bow to stern was on fire. Steve was apparently standing on the beach in front of the resort, along with dozens of other people. They all oohed and ahed at the spectacle. Some were wearing only shorts, others only robes. They had all been awakened by the noise and fire, and they came to the beach to look. The clip lasted a full minute. My date woke up to see what I was watching. I showed it to her. She was just as fascinated as I was. After we watched the clip 2 or 3 times, she pulled me back onto the bed and my attention returned to her. I slept very well after that. My date might have thought it was because she wore me out, which she did, but I slept well knowing that Juan and Hector were now -1 multi-million-dollar yacht. My date cooked breakfast for me on Sunday morning. After that, we parted, promising to meet again. I was home by 11 a.m. and had just walked in the door when the phone rang again. As expected, it was Jill. "Jake, have you heard the news?" she asked. I told her that Steve called me early in the morning and sent me a video. "Meredith called me last night," Jill said. "She sent me photos. I was going to call you, but then I thought maybe you weren't alone." She asked me, "Who could do this?" I replied, "I have no idea, but I imagine the Mendoza brothers have many enemies, including me." On Sunday, the incident became national news. Several channels talked about the yacht fire. About an hour later, the first police vessel, a fast trawler, arrived. They couldn't do anything but watch and take close-up videos of the fire. Another hour later, the first fireboat appeared. As it approached with its water cannons firing, 2 underwater explosions occurred within seconds of each other. The first explosion lifted the bow about 4 feet out of the water, and the second did the same to the stern. The fireboat had to retreat to a safe distance. The yacht began to sink quickly. 5 minutes later, the water rose to the gondolas, then the deck went underwater, and finally the entire boat disappeared below the surface. In an email from Steve, I learned that the Mendoza brothers were on the beach with everyone else, watching the fire. Steve said he told Juan and Hector that it was their boat on fire. They panicked and ran to the marina where they saw their boat was missing from the dock. They were horrified to realize that their multi-million-dollar yacht was sinking in the estuary. Somehow, they found a small boat in the marina and went out to their yacht. They got close but couldn't board due to the flames on the deck. They circled the burning boat for an hour until a police harbor trawler ordered them to move away. They watched until it sank completely. The Mendoza family immediately filed a right of salvage claim and demanded other parties stay away from the wreck. They were notified by police and the Coast Guard that while they might be eligible for salvage, an investigation into the fire's cause and the vessel's loss would be conducted. A police boat was assigned to monitor the wreck's location. That was all the news until Sunday evening. New information about the sunken ship appeared in the evening news. A crew member of a police trawler spotted a package floating in the water. They caught it in a net and pulled it on board. It contained 5 kilograms of white powder, triple wrapped in plastic. A few minutes later, another package surfaced. Then another and another. A quick test at the police laboratory confirmed the white powder was a controlled substance. Another hour later, divers from the Coast Guard and the port police arrived. They reported the yacht had 2 external compartments, accessible only from below the waterline, containing dozens of similar packages. An explosion on the boat had pierced the forward compartment, allowing the packages to float to the surface. Soon after, an arrest warrant was issued for the yacht's owners, the Mendoza family. It was too late to stop Juan and Hector's parents from escaping. They took a charter flight to New Orleans, which landed instead at a small airport outside Havana, Cuba. Juan, Hector, and Maria were arrested at a small airfield on the outskirts of Miami as they boarded a similar flight to New Orleans. When I heard this news, I thought, after all, God exists. The following Wednesday, I met Chief Williams in the park. I thanked him for doing exactly what I paid him to do, as if he were a cabinet maker who had outdone himself on a shelf project. Even though I knew better, I still asked him how he did it. He told me the opposite side of the estuary was a regional park. He camped there for the weekend. At midnight, when all was quiet, he moved his equipment to the water's edge. Wearing a black wetsuit and black face paint, he used snorkeling gear and a battery-powered towing device to swim across the river mouth to the marina. He surfaced just enough to use his air gun to shoot out 2 floodlights illuminating the pier, then waited. When no one came, he concluded there was no surveillance. He approached the pier where the yacht was moored, tied the blue sarong I gave him to the railing, and climbed aboard. He set a small battery-powered pump on the deck. One hose went into the diesel fuel tank, and the other end split into 3 hoses. 2 were stretched on either side of the upper deck, and the third was placed in the cockpit. Chief Williams untied the mooring lines and threw them into the water. He returned to the water and secured the stern rope to his underwater tug. The tug wasn't designed to tow such a heavy load, but it slowly moved the yacht out of the dock. When it was free, he moved to the bow and attached this line to the tug. The yacht sailed quietly along the pier, hidden by other boats. Finally, it emerged through the marina entrance into the open mouth. It was after 2 o'clock in the morning when Chief Williams boarded the yacht again and dropped anchor. The depth of the channel in the middle of the mouth was about 35 feet. The deck and cabin were flooded with diesel fuel. He considered removing the electric pump and hoses, but decided against it since the fire would look intentional. Chief Williams attached small explosive devices to the hull, one at the bow and one at the stern. They were set to 2-hour timers, enough time for people to enjoy the fire before the boat sank. He collected his equipment, surfaced, lit a flare, and threw it onto the deck. The deck immediately caught fire, and the flames quickly spread. He wanted to stay and watch, but needed to disappear underwater to avoid detection by observers who would soon arrive on the beach. The chief returned underwater to where he entered the river mouth. He quickly took off his snorkeling gear and wetsuit, rolled everything up and put it in his sister's car trunk. Sleepy tourists were awakened by the noise at the river mouth. He joined the group on the shore watching the boat burn. People oohed and ahed, taking photos and videos of the burning vessel. After the boat sank and the excitement died down, most people returned to their tents to sleep until sunrise. Before heading back to his sister's house, the chief disposed of all his scuba gear in a way that it would never be found. When I asked him about his plans, he said his terminally ill wife had only a few weeks left. After her death, he and his sister would take her ashes to Miami and bury them in the same cemetery as her parents. He and his sister would likely live together in her home for the foreseeable future. I admired his devotion to his wife. He loved her until the end of her life. I followed the news about the investigation into the loss of the yacht. The only evidence the police found was a blue sarong tied to the railing on the dock where the yacht was moored. It was believed that the boat was deliberately burned as part of a drug deal gone bad. The Mendoza twins fought the charges against them, hiring a prestigious law firm to defend them. Unfortunately for them, they were caught red-handed. The prosecutors separated the twins and offered each a deal, saying they would both go to jail either way. But the first to take the deal would testify. In the end, they both agreed to the deal quickly, giving away the entire operation they were involved in. The investigation and legal negotiations dragged on for several months before they were sent to trial. Since deciding to sink the yacht, I felt guilty. I was a lawyer sworn to uphold the law, with strict rules of ethical conduct. This feeling intensified as I acted to make the sinking a reality. I became a criminal but also unknowingly exposed a major operation. My fears and guilt disappeared. I felt good, as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I was no longer the sullen, humorless person I had been. I was as happy as a divorced father could be. Jill was probably the first to notice my happiness. I no longer looked at her with contempt and hostility. I don't know if she connected my new attitude with the sinking of the yacht, but she never asked. She seemed to enjoy the friendlier atmosphere between us. We saw each other often, always concerning little Jake's life and activities. We tried to make his life as normal as possible. We were together on the 4th of July, taking him to the beach to watch fireworks over the ocean. For holidays like Halloween, Jill stayed home to hand out candy while I followed little Jake and his friends around the neighborhood, watching them and taking pictures. When Thanksgiving came, it was supposed to take place at Jill's parents' house, despite our divorce. Her mom and dad tried to get me to come. Jill's brother and sister were also planning to come with their children, little Jake's cousins. Jill suggested we go together. I didn't want to give the impression that we were back together, but it made sense to travel together. Initially, I was nervous about how I would be received, but no one said anything. In fact, most of our relatives still considered us a couple. Jill never took off her wedding rings after finding them, which contributed to this impression. Shortly after the divorce was final, I asked her why she didn't take them off. She said, "I wear them to scare off men who want to date me." I didn't believe her. I knew she still had feelings for me and hadn't completely let go. I think I still had feelings for her, too. Though I no longer wore my wedding ring on a leather cord around my neck, it still sat prominently in the silver bowl on my dresser where I kept my cufflinks, tie pins, and badges. It was obvious to our families that our hearts weren't in the divorce. They never knew the real reason. Officially, it was recorded as irreconcilable differences. They saw it as their mission to get us back together. We spent Christmas as a family, just the three of us. Jake stayed at Jill's apartment. I had dinner there on Christmas Eve and went home while he was there. Little Jake shook and rattled all the gifts under the tree, even those that weren't for him. I returned early on Christmas morning. Jill was already up, making coffee and eggnog, a tradition we had started. We sipped our drinks while little Jake opened his presents. Finally, little Jake pulled out a gift hidden under the tree and gave it to Jill. "Who is this for, Mommy?" he asked. Jill looked at the tag and said, "This is for me, from Dad." Her eyes seemed to moisten. "Thank you, Jake. I didn't expect anything from you. You shouldn't have—" "Open it, Mommy," said little Jake. When she opened the gift, she found a pale blue amethyst necklace with a matching bracelet and earrings. "Oh, Jake, this is wonderful," she said slowly, a tear rolling down her cheek. "You shouldn't cry," I said. Jill didn't respond with words. She moved from the couch to my chair, put her arms around my neck, and rested her head on my shoulder. "Thank you, Jake," she whispered. Later, after breakfast, Jill washed the dishes and I dried them. Without looking at me, she asked, "Jake, are you happy?" I didn't know how to respond at first, but then I said, "I was happier when we were married." I didn't finish the sentence. Still not looking at me, she asked another unexpected question. "My law firm is throwing a big New Year's party on the 31st. I'd like you to come with me as my date." I didn't know what to say at first. This would be the first social event we'd attend together that didn't involve our family. Finally, I spoke. "I would be honored to be your date. Thank you for inviting me." "I was so afraid you would already have plans," she said. I didn't have any plans. I probably would have just stayed home, drank too much, and watched the ball drop on TV. The New Year's party sounds much better. It was a great party. Jill's law firm was large and prestigious. They rented a big hotel room with lots of food, an open bar, and a band. Jill looked amazing in a navy blue sheath dress, accented by her amethyst necklace and earrings. We sat at a table with her friends and colleagues, some of whom I knew. We danced a lot and became quite comfortable with each other. Occasionally, single lawyers approached me, asking to dance with Jill, knowing she was divorced. Before I could respond, Jill would intervene, saying she was only dancing with me that evening. I told her I didn't mind if she danced with her friends. She explained that most of them were wolves she had been fighting off for months. Even her wedding rings didn't deter them. She kept saying that if I hadn't agreed to be her date, she wouldn't have come to the party. At midnight, we were on the dance floor as the last seconds of the year ticked away. When the new year arrived, everyone started hugging and kissing. I didn't let Jill out of my arms. We held each other, looked into each other's eyes, and then kissed. It was not a timid kiss, but a long, deep, meaningful one, full of love and passion. Everyone must have noticed how into each other we were, because they didn't try to interrupt us to celebrate the new year. When we finally broke away, we were a little embarrassed. People looked at us. Then we hugged and kissed a few people and shook a few hands. We returned to our table and the band played "Oh, How We Danced on the Night We Were Wed." We danced to rock and roll music, encouraging our friends to join in. During a break at our table, I wondered why Sally hadn't come. Jill told me that Sally was very close to a judge who decided many of her cases. Jill had hired a private investigator to find out more. He discovered that Sally had slept with several judges who heard her cases. This information was passed on to the district attorney. Jill ended her story by saying, "I wanted revenge too." While we were dancing, an attractive woman approached and asked to dance with me. Jill kindly agreed. I recognized her as Elizabeth, a classmate I hadn't seen in a long time. She said, "Jake, the same thing happened to me with Juan Mendoza a few years ago. I was ashamed, but I told my husband what happened. He forgave me. We haven't been to a reunion since, but we wanted to thank you." I had to pretend I didn't understand. "Elizabeth, I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't," she replied, hugging me before returning to her table. She kissed the man she was with and whispered something in his ear. He turned to me, waved, and nodded. Throughout the dance, several men patted me on the back, shook my hand, or bought me drinks, saying thank you. A woman came up behind me, hugged me, and kissed my cheek before returning to her husband without saying a word. Jill remarked, "You're very popular with the ladies today, Jake." "Maybe it's my new cologne," I said with a grin. While getting drinks at the bar, I approached Bill Allen. "Your firm represents Juan and Hector, right?" Bill confirmed this, saying they had a lot of money and received personal attention from the senior partners. He added that they were going to spend a long time in prison and wouldn't be together. Since their arrest, they haven't been together. They revealed a lot about their smuggling operation, including the names of the main players. They would almost certainly be killed in any federal prison, so they were separated and given new identities. They will serve time in separate state prisons, one in North Dakota and one in Ohio, with fake convictions. I asked Bill if he ever saw them. He said he did some support work for the partners when they needed documents signed or decisions made. I asked Bill to give them a message, and he agreed. I told him to say, "You messed with my wife, so I messed with your life." Revenge isn't complete unless those who hurt you know that you've not only evened the score, but completely destroyed them. My words should have hinted that I was behind their downfall, but not enough for them to prove anything. Plus, the law wasn't close to catching the arsonist of their boat. I didn't know it at the time, but Bill started dating Maria, Hector's ex-wife. No matter how beautiful and seductive she was, what she wanted most was to find a man who would truly love her. She wanted a husband and many children. Bill turned out to be that person. Before the evening was over, Steve announced there would be a bridal brunch reception the next morning. Some classmates had early flights and couldn't attend, while others changed their travel plans or lived locally and didn't need to leave. At one point during the reception, Jill tapped her mimosa glass with a spoon to get everyone's attention. She had something to say. "Thank you, everyone, for being here today. I hope you have forgiven me for my mistakes 2 years ago. I know Jake has forgiven me, but I also know he will never forget. I will never forgive myself, and I will never forget. However, I want you all to know that I am incredibly happy today and will do anything to keep Jake incredibly happy for the rest of his life." Thanks for listening to One Infidelity Hit. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop us a like.